This is Mark Madden, the super genius for Tootsie's Diner, a family-owned diner specializing in homemade breakfast foods, luncheon specials, and catering. It's located in Coraopolis, Pennsylvania, and take it from me, Tootsie's is number one in my book. The menu is stacked with original recipes, fresh ingredients, and, woo, creative Tootsie's flair. Get it? Flair. Tell Colleen and Mark the super genius sent you. Check them out in person and online at tootsiespghdiner.com. And check me out, Mark Madden, the super genius, twice a month on Justin LaBar's Wrestling Reality Podcast.
Reality check. Go. Time for a reality check. Yeah. Time for a reality.
You know, I always look forward to these segments and having him in studio. It's always well listened, and I enjoy talking with him. But even more so, I'm appreciative that the super genius Mark Madden is in studio today to keep this podcast moving, because without this podcast, without Mark today, I would have to be at the damn parade covering it. So thank you for getting me out of that.
You'll never see one in D.C.
That's true.
You should enjoy it when they have one in Pittsburgh.
I've done enough Steeler and Penguin parades already, and it's fine. I get the idea. You guys are pretty good. I get it. Congrats, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, good to see the club win, especially 2 in a row. That's historic. First time that a team's won 2 cups in a row since '98. First time it's ever happened in the salary cap era.
Mm-hmm.
Next year's going to be real interesting, because I just think it's impossible to three-peat given the physical demands of hockey and the just overwhelming, exhausting demands of the hockey schedule. The Penguins having played, I think it's 213 games over the past 2 seasons. So I don't think they need to three-peat to even further solidify their credibility. I think 2 in a row and 5 overall, 3 in the Crosby era, I think that's plenty, especially for somebody like me who's been going to Penguin games since I was 6 years old and saw them at low ebb, more than once, and thought they'd never win a single Stanley Cup. If it stops at 5 before I stop breathing, that's okay. I'll have seen everything I wanted to and a lot more.
People might think that this podcast is beating the drum for your death, because I think every time you're on, we have some comparison that starts with before you die.
I'm a lot closer to the end than I am the middle, young man.
If you guys get a 3 in a row next year, if you make a 3 in a row next year, I don't even know if they'll be able to raise the cup. I think they might just fall over in exhaustion. It might just.
Well, I think, not to make this a hockey podcast, but yeah. I think this year their biggest strength was, among many, they returned almost exactly the same roster from last year, so there was a lot of continuity. But now they're going to lose several players to free agency, although the most key player would be Nick Bonino, and I'm, no offense to him, but you can replace Nick Bonino. Mm-hmm. And I think this team needs turnover now. I think just as the continuity helped this year, turnover, fresh legs, fresh attitudes will help next year.
I did my social media segment just prior to this one, but there was one question that was requested to go to you and me. So it's actually Peter Bahi, who does a great job actually transcribing this show. Thank you, Peter. He had this question.
Somebody transcribes this show.
Yes.
My God.
Is that a my God, you're stunned, or my God, you're sad?
A little of both.
Peter says to you and Madden, was Shane Douglas ever a big star in Pittsburgh during his ECW championship run? His question is in regards to whether Pittsburgh saw him as a star when pro wrestling was huge in 97, 98.
No offense to Shane, because he did a great act, and I watch ECW from those days probably more frequently than I watch any tapes from, wrestling back in the day. That and the NWO Invasion, that stuff. But ECW, we romanticize what big impact it had, and it had a big impact within the industry. It certainly reshaped a lot of the things WWE did. But it was a niche promotion that ultimately went out of business because it couldn't make money. So I think when you're a niche promotion that went out of business because it couldn't make money, I don't think you're going to be a recognizable superstar anywhere, not even in your hometown. I think if Sid went, down the street to the supermarket or the movie theater, there might be 1 or 2 people that would recognize him. But if Kurt Angle did the same thing, or Bruno Sammartino back when did the same thing, they would be, I don't want to say mob, but a lot, maybe Bruno in the day would have been mob.
Yeah.
A lot of people would recognize Shane then, as great as he was, not so much.
I'm imagining, because I wouldn't have been able to afford you, but you would have fit in well in ECW, I think.
When I left WCW briefly over something they didn't like that I said on the hotline, I talked to Paul, and in fact, they one time put a graphic up on their open for the TV show Free Mark Madden.
Did they really?
Absolutely. But Kevin Nash and Scott Hall said they were going to get me back by making everybody miserable till they brought me back. And that's exactly what happened. They just made life chaotic for the people who were in charge of me, guys like Tom Hunt and Mike Weber down there. In I don't know if they called it new media then, but that's what I did before I got on TV, like Internet 900 number, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And they brought me back, I believe, with a doubled salary. So people talk about friends in wrestling. There aren't too many that are really friends. Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, two legitimate friends that I made in the wrestling business.
Well, let me ask you. I don't actually think I've ever asked you this. And last week I did a little story time. I told a funny story with Kevin, and so. And as
Kevin Nash, by the way, who predicted exactly the score Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Final.
Did he really?
6-0 Pittsburgh, yes.
So I told the story last week about Kevin, and I've gotten to know Kevin over the last 6-7 years, but Mark's known him way longer and had more road experiences with him. You were and are still very good friends with Kevin and Scott. You correct me if I'm wrong. So they came to WCW '96. You didn't know them prior to that, did you?
No.
So it was a pretty.
Scott didn't like me at all at first.
Okay, give me.
He thought I was like this 900 number dirt sheet guy that poked his nose in too often.
So what? Give me the origin of how the friendship developed. I guess. Why do they trust the guy who was doing this internet radio stuff, or what happened there? How's it?
I think because we're just all kind of commonly effed up in the head. I mean, I don't know why. Who knows why people become friends, Justin?
But you understand my question. You don't understand what I'm saying. It just it feels like it is somewhat of a random friendship that especially as you said, as it started off with Scott hating you. I don't know. Just
hate's too strong a word. He just thought I was, I think, a pest. I remember one time I was talking to Roddy Piper. Mm-hmm. He goes, "What are you doing talking to him?" And it's just I don't know. Yeah. But I don't know. It was pretty organic, actually.
Okay. Well, it's good. I was always curious if there was one thing that happened or something that.
Well, plus, if I had to say one thing that we have in common is that all three of us will say what's on our minds, even if it can occasionally be to our own detriment.
I can buy that as a bonding for all three. Knowing all three of you, I can buy that. Other people you do know, this was a big controversial. I know you're gonna be mad that they're even in the limelight of controversy, but I have to bring it up to you. A long-standing rivalry between Vince Russo and Jim Cornette. It had a new chapter again. Russo was the subject of a lot of negative banter on the WWE Network between Jim Cornette and Eric Bischoff. Who that was meant to be some kind of like, Jim Cornette and Bischoff are now bonding and
well, first off, let me jump in.
Okay.
Jim Cornette, as he is wont to do, talked about how he'd never talk to Eric Bischoff again. He'd kick his ass if he ever saw him, or words to that effect. Like, right. I mean, Jimmy couldn't fight his way out of a wet paper bag, and he certainly couldn't beat up a karate guy like Eric Bischoff. But the minute Jimmy had a chance to be on TV and become, even to some small degree relevant again, he dropped the laundry like a $2 hooker and went on WWE TV and made nice with Eric Bischoff. That says a lot about Jim Cornette. He didn't forgive Eric Bischoff. He just went on there because he wanted a chance to be Jim Cornette again, which he hasn't been able to do because he's unemployable. Jim Cornette is unemployable in the wrestling business. It's a shame because he knows more about it than just about anybody, but he's a guy that people just can't work with. So I thought that him appearing on WWE TV, the network with Eric Bischoff, that in and of itself was laughable. That's a funny story right there. No knock on Eric. Eric never swore he wouldn't work with Jim Cornette again.
Right.
I don't think Eric Bischoff even considers Jim Cornette very much at all.
Right.
But Jim Cornette, like I said, a $2 hooker dropping the laundry, and you can quote me on that frequently. I hope you do.
So, talking a lot about Russo, they bonded over that.
And Jim will say, "I'm fat."
Yes.
That'll be his comeback. Madden's fat. Okay, good.
They bonded over the dislike for Russo. Russo then had a response on one of his podcasts, which then prompted Cornette to release about 9 or 12 minutes of audio on his podcast. And we're not going to play it or anything like that. If you want to hear it, you can hear it. It started off with him just cutting this wrestling promo.
It's a nice change from telling old Midnight Express stories, I'm sure.
It starts off as a wrestling promo.
This one time me and Stan, and this one time me and Bobby.
It starts off as a wrestling promo, and it ends with him taking shots at Russo's family and his kids, and do I have to call your wife of it? It just got uncomfortable and unprofessional and ridiculous.
Let me know the next time Jimmy throws a punch.
Yeah, well, so he challenges Russo.
Let me know the next time Jimmy throws a punch.
He says that he challenges
Jimmy runs his mouth a lot. Let me know the next time Jimmy throws a punch.
he was calling out Russo's family. He did that to you too, didn't he?
Yes, he called my house one time when he had decided that I wasn't his friend anymore, because we were friends at one time.
What happened?
He asked my mother if she could stop performing oral sex on black men long enough to take a message for me.
Jesus.
And my mother said, yeah, let me get a pen. Because my mother was like, cool in that regard.
Yeah.
And he didn't phrase it like,
Yeah.
The racial
Yeah.
epithet was in there.
Yeah.
Jimmy drops N-bombs like a $2 hooker drops the laundry. And if he ever says otherwise, he's a liar. And that's what Jim Cornette does. He lies an awful lot. That he's good at. But that's how Jimmy is. The personal attacks, he's just venting because...
What happened with you two? You said you're friends at one point.
I criticized the gangsters in Smoky Mountain as a racist gimmick. Bruce Mitchell did it first. I kind of piled on in that regard. And, with Jimmy, you're either for him or against him.
And that set him off, that you criticized?
Yes. And then he tells all these stories. He lied, like he came to Smoky Mountain. I drove him around. I bought him Wendy's. I mean, I did go to Smoky Mountain one time because my good friend, the late Brian Hildebrand, referee Mark Curtis,
right,
who literally grew up a couple miles from me on the same street in Reserve Township in Pittsburgh. I went down there to visit him, and I drove around not with Jim, but with Casey O'Connor, who worked for Jim then, and Bruce Mitchell. And to settle the food question, Casey O'Connor bought me Pizza Hut.
Well, now we have that on record. You were there, so you're more qualified than most people that talk about the stuff. Bischoff ruined WCW. No, Russo came in. You were there. What's your impression or memories of how each did in their creative roles?
Well, first off, WCW went out of business because when the Time Warner AOL merger went through and Ted Turner lost hands-on over basically his own company, Turner was always the guardian angel of WCW. So once that was gone, the clock started ticking. And, we signed too many guys who didn't deserve big money to big money contracts. We lost a lot of money. I can't say going out of business wasn't the right thing to do, but it was mostly because Jamie Kellner, who at that point, ran TBS and TNT, just didn't want wrestling on his channels anymore. At least that's my opinion. There's so many different stories and so many different factors. Who could tell what was really the case and who remembers what really happened, quite honestly. As far as Russo and WCW, Russo did real well the first time through. I thought he was much better the first time through, but then he wouldn't work with the committee when things started to, sour a little bit. And then he came back when Bischoff came back. That was a mistake because those two just were never going to get along. And I don't think anything went right during that particular regime. I've said this before, and Vince sometimes takes this as an insult, but I think he needs an editor. I think his best work is done when he throws about 10 piles of excrement at the wall and somebody else gets to pick out which 3 are going to stick. And I don't think that just applies to Russo. I think that applies to almost anybody who's ever been a creative force in the wrestling business.
Sure.
So, the company, plummeted. The second time through, Vince started to really blur the line. He didn't even, pay remote respect to kayfabe anymore. Yeah. Like, the Hogan, Jarrett Angle, stuff like that. It was too inside. And I think, and plus what's too, and I've said this to both their faces, Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara as bookers weren't funny. And they tried too hard to be funny. They weren't funny. Don't know how to be funny. They just aren't funny. They're kind of New York funny, like, oppressive funny, in-your-face funny, but to the general public, that's not funny. Now, I think Russo's a real creative guy. And I think if you look at his track record in wrestling, what he did in WWE to resurrect that company, far overshadows any struggles he may have had after that. But clearly that was his, I don't want to say creative peak, but that's when it worked the best. So I have a lot of respect for Vince Russo. I think by the time he came back to WCW the second time, things were too far gone to fix. And I think Eric would probably agree with that as well. Now, Eric, when I worked with him, because I was with him a long time, and I have a lot of respect for Eric as well. I always say Eric Bischoff paid for my house, so you won't, get too much bad about him out of me. Eric was a big picture guy. Sometimes he listened to the wrong people, but he had a real good viewpoint about what would work and what wouldn't, again, in terms of the big picture. So if you ask me who was a bigger success in wrestling, Eric Bischoff or Vince Russo, I'd have a hard time deciding because Eric Bischoff was more the straw that stirred the drink during WCW's big run, whereas in WWE, Vince Russo was filtered through Vince McMahon.
Right. I don't know if politics would allow it. Did you ever lobby or try to get a creative role yourself?
I would occasionally pitch kind of like freelance ideas.
Yeah.
But I mean, I helped Jericho.
Otherwise, you would just tell them on commentary when you knew they were going to be wrong.
Well, no, I don't think I did that with the one camera shot. I don't want to go over that story again.
I know.
But yeah, what I would do is I would kind of talk with guys I knew and say, hey, why don't you, like me and Disco talked a lot with Jericho about the man of 1,004 holds. Not that that was the be all end all of creativity.
Still
but
pretty funny.
It was pretty funny. The Bagwell Steiner skit in St. Louis where they were mocking Mark McGuire and the Ender Steendion. I had a bit of input on that, but I was hardly a creative force.
Yeah.
Could I have been? Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. Could I still be? I could do better than what they're doing up in New York now. I guarantee that.
It's never going to happen, I know, but I would.
I'm too old.
I know it would be knowing you, but better than our audience does. That would be very interesting.
Don't want to get on the road either.
Yeah, no.
I don't even want to go to the Penguins parade, let alone fly to like Wichita on a Tuesday.
That's true.
I will say this. It does amaze me that nobody, not even one of the smaller companies, has come to me even for my opinion. Because never mind, the time I worked in wrestling, and I'll tell you, I was really good on color commentary. The fans, the marks, the people in the interim since then always bash me because I got a chance to do what they never got a chance to do. But it amazes me that as somebody who's had a top-rated radio show in the same city for 20 years straight without interruption, that people wouldn't look at that success in the entertainment industry and consider that I worked in wrestling and have a mind for that business and at least ask my friggin' opinion.
I totally get where you're coming from. I mean, I work with IWC Wrestling here, and we always say, you're always welcome to be at our shows, and we love working with you. I would actually have to say, my guess, to the reason and maybe why that is, Mark, I think, honestly, they probably intimidated by you.
The last thing people who run a wrestling company want, and this especially applies to the McMahons, although I don't even think they remember who I am at this point, but the people who run a wrestling company, the last thing they want around is somebody who knows more than they do. And that's why Vince McMahon, despite his current, I would assume, good relationship with Jim Ross, was always intimidated by and always treated Jim Ross badly because Jim Ross knows a lot more about wrestling than Vince McMahon or Paul Levesque or Stephanie McMahon.
I think,
and when I say a lot more, I mean like Jim Ross is batting 400 and those people are batting number 8 in the lineup of the last place team by comparison.
Well, like I said, I think probably it's just intimidation. I think people probably, you have such a loud presence, they're probably intimidated.
And not only that, I'm way smarter than them, period.
Well, but that shouldn't, that's,
not just wrestling
that's
smart.
Their own
I'm just way smarter than them, period.
Well, that's their own stupidity for not tapping in, just trying to utilize and saying, look, we'll pay you, come help us.
I'll give you an example, though, of what I think is their disdain for me.
Like, I put you in Ring of Honor. Like get Ring of Honor to call you.
Kevin Kelly asked me one time when they were in Pittsburgh doing TV to color on a few matches, but I was out of town.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have done it. I love that product. Yeah. I love that product.
They've been coming twice a year, so
love it.
Make
Absolutely
it happen.
Love Ring of Honor. But I'll give an example of WWE's disdain for me.
Okay.
Was the Flair book, the autobiography.
Right.
I rewrote it.
Right.
A guy named Keith Elliott Greenberg wrote the original version. I was supposed to edit it.
Right.
It was so bad, the original draft.
You said last time he was a Hogan guy, basically.
Right. That Vince McMahon and Hunter and Rick and I all got together at a pay-per-view, I think in Philadelphia. And they decided to have me rewrite the book. I was technically still listed as an editor. And a lot of key stuff, got through in altered fashion. He provided the framework. But they were, like, nobody talked to Steve Austin about Ric Flair. Right. How can that happen?
Yeah.
How can Austin not be in the Flair book?
Yeah.
Okay, so I redid it. It became a New York Times bestseller. I saved the book. I have no compunction about saying that. I saved the book. It probably would have been a New York Times bestseller regardless because, it's Ric Flair's autobiography. But it wouldn't have been as well received. I mean, Meltzer wrote that in The Observer, that Mark Madden saved the book. Okay? You know how much they paid me to do it? $1,000. Yeah. Okay, you know what my next offer was? What? To edit another book that somebody had mangled, a Hunter workout book. Uh-huh. And I'm the guy you want to rewrite a workout book, that's for sure. So I just said, no thanks. I mean, I should have been writing their next big book after the job I did in a Flair book, but they just don't want me around for whatever reason. I've gone backstage to visit, and I've had, people like, what's the guy's name, Jimmy, the security guy? Mm-hmm. Come up and say, what are you doing here? Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'll see you later.
See, I don't know. Maybe I'm a leech. I love having you on my stuff. You always make...
You know who the most welcoming person ever was to me backstage at a WWE show? I don't know why, but Shane McMahon. He came over to me and said, "Who are you?" And I told him, and he goes, "Oh, I remember you, kind of." He said, kind of like laughing. You know, and we talked for a while. He was all right.
I'll say this. You know, I've out of meeting all the McMahon, Shane certainly is the most. I've had one night in sitting with him. He is certainly the most normal, down to earth, I guess.
That's a good way of putting it. And I like.
And I'm not knocking Stephanie, and I'm not knocking. But she's always been nice to me. But Shane just has a very approachable way.
And I like Hunter too. I mean, I think
I like him too.
I think he's become a McMahon to his detriment. But when Flair did his last run of house shows in WWE, I took time off work and I drove with Flair and Hunter to like Johnstown, Erie, you know, Wheeling, all the Youngstown, all that little mini circuit around Pittsburgh, and Hunter was very gracious and a great guy to hang out with. That was absolutely the time of my life.
Yeah. I'm not surprised about what you said about Shane. I had one night with him, and he was hanging out with him, and he was very normal,
decent guy.
Yes, very very decent, and smart as hell. Not no surprise, I guess. All right, let's go in real quick. This Sunday, Money in the Bank in St. Louis. First ever women's Money in the Bank ladder match. This is going to be something to see. I actually think they're going to try to. I think they start the show with this actually, for multiple reasons. But Charlotte, Becky, Natalya, Tamina, Carmella.
One of these things don't belong with the others. One of these things does not belong. I think that Charlotte and Becky are probably the two best talents in the WWE female division right now, especially because they've ruined Bayley. They've just totally blown it with Bayley.
Don't get me started.
There's not enough time to talk about how they've blown it with her. They've blown it with her, and none of it's her fault. Not one little bit of it is Bayley's fault. Yep. They've blown it with her in every imaginable way you can blow it. And having Sasha involved with the cruiserweight division is just such it's an anchor on her career. It's horrible. But Charlotte and Becky are tremendous. Natalya, you can make the argument Natalya is the best ever women's worker when you factor in her longevity. She is incredible, and she's still very good looking too.
Absolutely.
She's just the whole package. I think Carmella, for like the kind of eye candy type of girl, has really improved by leaps and bounds during her tenure in the ring. And I hated the thought of that Ellsworth act. It's worked.
Yeah.
It's worked. I can't believe he's ever been on WWE TV for 1 minute, but it's worked. I think if they try to involve Tamina too much, she'll drag the match down. I hope they make her participation relatively minimal. But I think they have the talent in there to really pull it off. I just hope they don't take too many risks, Justin. That's the one thing I hate about a ladder match is if you're inexperienced at doing it, there's a lot of risk involved, and I worry about the potential for injury. Not necessarily like, catastrophic right then and there, but breaking down the bodies of these girls to the point where their careers are somehow altered. You know how they always talk about the hell in the cell, your career is never the same after? That actually applies more so in a shoot fashion to the ladder matches.
Well, you make me, probably why I like having you on here, you make me sound really smart because right as you were walking in here at the end of the segment before, the last question I took was, is a ladder match the most dangerous and everything? And I said, I was like, to say it's the most dangerous, it's hard to say, but I said it definitely has one of the highest of risks. And I talked about it's all about the users, it's about who's in there using that ladder.
Well, I've talked to Scott about that because he was in the first big-time ladder match with him and HBK. And he said you really got to be careful, and he used the word deliberate. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't.
There's no give.
Right, you can't rush through things, I think is what he was saying. So, I just hope the girls are careful, but I think they have the talent to really pull off something very special.
I think Natalya makes the most sense. Obviously, you and I agree with this. Heels always make more sense to have this briefcase because of the nature of the license of steel.
Unless Charlotte gets it in turns, which she's always seems to be on the verge of. But that's because she wants to be a heel.
Right. I think Natalya or Carmella would be in the two heels that would be the favorites to this. But I think Natalya would be more fit. I think she deserves it too.
I think Natalya deserves it, but that's not a good reason to give something to somebody.
But it would fit that they finally committed to this heel Natalya. They've committed to it, and she's done great with it.
Carmella could do a lot with that briefcase. And I think that would be, if they want to put a rocket, up somebody's backside, she's the one to do it with. But I tend to agree that Natalya might be the best choice. Yeah, I think they're any one of four people you can't go wrong with. But again, you're right. The briefcase doesn't really work with a baby face.
Right. Yeah, I think.
Although if they could figure out a way to make it work better, and I don't know what that way would be because there's certain things that don't work with a baby, but that might be interesting.
I don't know how. And we've seen babyfaces do this, and it's absurd. It's absurdly stupid. Where they declare
Didn't
a
somebody
time.
schedule it?
Rob Van Dam. He was like the second Money in the Bank holder ever. I think he was the second, and he walked out on Raw, said to John Cena, it made the time and place it did on an ECW One Night Stand. Now, slightly, I say, okay, you're putting John Cena supposedly in your territory. They did it in the ball. So in a way, but it's still stupid. Why are you going to schedule it?
Well, now, was Rob a heel, a babyface, or was he just high?
Well, the high is a safe answer because I don't remember if he was heel or babyface.
And I love Rob, but I mean, come on.
Oh, he doesn't care if you say that.
No, I know he doesn't.
He smokes proudly. I don't remember what he was on the booking side of things. Obviously, he was the babyface on the ECW One Night Stand pay-per-view. It's just stupid. Why would you have a license to steal? Why would you schedule your fight? I don't. But
I agree, but that's what a babyface does.
I know.
To be fair, which is why it works better.
Right.
Back to square one with the heel.
You should almost just put all heels in a ladder match. Just let them all be in there. Forget having a babyface. All right, Mark, I appreciate it. Tootsie's Diner presenting Mark Madden. Of course, Tootsie's Diner, Coraopolis, Pennsylvania. Go by. Great breakfast, great lunch, a great diner food experience. Tell them Mark and Justin sent you. They're at the parade. You're not.
I know. That's all right. I try to avoid 500,000 people wherever possible.
Mark Madden, Wrestling Reality. Next week, we're going to open the door again. Virgil returns.
Why would you do that?
They're paying.
Who's paying?
Sponsor.
To have Virgil here?
Yes.
Which sponsor?
J&D Waterproofing.
Oh, move that over to the big double M. I mean, come on, Virgil?
Well, we'll talk off air.
How quick do you think Virgil gambles that money you give him away?
I don't know.
I'll answer my own question really quickly.
He's watching you right now. So this is why you need to go watch the video version of this on the Pittsburgh Podcast Facebook page, because we have Mark sitting here in this nice studio, and you have Virgil headshot right over his shoulder. All is right in the world. Virgil, if you want to be here next week with Virgil,
No.
Are you sure?
No, because he'll want it. Like, if I have something, he'll, oh, man, give me that. I was at the Comic-Con one time, Steel City Con, and I was selling NWO shirts. He just came over and took one and walked away.
No, he didn't.
Yes, he did.
So all the more reason you need to come back next week. And
Then the next day he wanted another one.
You got to retrieve your shirt and get your money for it.
No chance.
Tell him, they're like, come here next week and tell him, I know you're getting paid for this podcast. I demand a portion of that money for my shirt.
That just won't happen. Ever see that movie Bronx Tale?
No.
There's a scene in there where the protagonist, the main character, keeps chasing the guy around who owes him $20, and then his mentor, the mob boss, says, "Do you like that guy?" And the kid goes, "No." He goes, "Would you be better off if you've never had to deal with him again?" And the kid goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Isn't that worth $20?" And the kid goes, "Yeah." So there you go, same thing.
I don't know. I think it'd be a great WCW reunion. Head of NW security and color commentator for Nitro, right there.
Pass.
Don't give up on the dream. I am Justin LaBar. We will make this happen. It's Wrestling Reality.